Welcome to the HR Community Podcast. My name is Shane O'Neill, founder of Civitas Talent, the HR and HSC recruitment community. Each episode we will host HR leaders and discuss their journey and discover best practice HR solutions across the HR industry. Whether you're a CEO, HR executive, or operating across the wider HR space, this podcast is for you. Please like and subscribe, and don't forget to comment and share your reviews. Enjoy the episode. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the HR Community Podcast. This afternoon, I'm with Kris Clelland. Good afternoon, Kris.
Hey.
Kris and I have known each other a very long time. Comes with a wealth of knowledge in talent, HR, D&I. We had a really good chat before the podcast just around what's happening here locally in Australia as well as globally. So I will hand the mic over to you, Kris. Can you tell us a little bit about who you are, your background in terms of experience, and let's go from there.
Awesome. Thanks, Shane. And hi, everyone who's listening. For those who don't know me, my name, as Shane said, is Kris Clelland. I've been in and around the talent acquisition traps for probably longer than I would want to admit. Don't come from a talent acquisition background like a lot of people. I sort of fell into talent acquisition or used it as an engine to probably stay in Australia or gain sponsorship and citizenship in Australia. I come from a technical background, did a degree in engineering, moved into pre-sales technical work, then moved into sales and sales management. And that sort of led to going from product and software sales into sort of people and process sales and talent acquisition. And the last 10 years have been recruitment initially with Michael Page, learning the ropes in the 360-degree recruitment style. And then I moved into talent acquisition, running regional, local and global teams for organisations as small as 3 to 500, right up to Amazon Web Services or Amazon, which at the time that I was there was about 960,000. So yeah, I've worked everything from startup, scale up, right through to large enterprise. My last full-time role was regional head of talent acquisition for Wipro, massive Indian systems integrator, where I had teams across Asia Pacific, Middle East and Africa. And then for the last 2 years, I've been doing my own consulting stuff, consulting, advisory, workshops and masterclasses in the areas that Shane said at the start of the call: talent acquisition, talent management, DE&I, employer branding, EVP, people analytics or talent analytics and talent data, and a few other areas. Very recently, I was announced as the managing director for Talint Partners. For those of you who maybe don't recognise the name Talint Partners, you might recognise the Tiara Staffing Awards. Talint Partners are the organisation who run and own the Tiara Awards ceremonies globally. And in my new role, I will now be tasked at scaling all of the delivery models, sponsored content and everything else in Asia Pacific for their business as well. So yeah, that's a little bit about me.
Amazing. Awesome. This has been in the making for a long, long time, Kris, and everyone listening. We've spoken about having this podcast for a long time, and recently Kris has stepped up into the new role of MD at Talint Partners. I thought this is going to be perfect timing because we can talk a little bit more about that. And while we kick off the episode, let's get into, I guess, the more strategic stuff that I know you love when it comes to people and talent, Kris. Like from a talent strategy perspective, and I know the market is quite different now here in Australia, globally. We've gone from post-COVID, a huge push in terms of hiring. Last year, a lot of companies pulled back, started to look at their costs and restructure. And now this year, there's still a few question marks, although it's quite early in the year. Like, tell us a little bit about the importance of investing in, firstly, the strategic side of talent. And in the current market, what do you think is a good approach by companies now? Is it looking at short-term, long-term? Let us know what you think.
Yeah, I know that you've used the word talent quite loosely there, Shane. It's a very big topic, and I would say post-COVID, anyone who's in any sort of talent acquisition or recruitment role, the responsibility level and the remit that talent professionals now hold is much larger than it even was sort of 5-6 years ago, pre-COVID. I think talent teams need to be thinking, as you said, more strategically, but also getting way more involved in the project side post someone being hired. The talent management piece, internal engagement and mobility, upskilling and cross-skilling. I'm sure everyone's more than aware that the word skills seems to be used in 9 out of 10 segments, newsletters, articles, podcasts, streams, online events, virtual events, in-person events. And there's a very strong reason for that, is that talent do need to get involved more in identifying the skills for a role, rather than being sort of historic or chaotic, and going after the tactical skill sets, the educational backgrounds that historically have fitted into the square peg into the square hole. I don't think there is such a thing as a square peg for a square hole anymore. And talent strategy-wise, end-to-end, doesn't stop at someone being hired. I would say the recruitment life cycle probably ends around there. But you do still have to be in contact as a partner to your businesses, to HR, to talent management, to people analytics, to data teams, to ensure that once the person is there, they're actually keeping a hold of the person from an organisational standpoint, but the person is actually suited into more than one stream within the business. So I think certainly when it comes to talent strategy, there's a lot of pillars in there, or a lot more pillars than there certainly was even sort of 5 to 7 years ago. And talent professionals are probably wearing 2, 3, 4x the hats that they did a short space of time ago. And I think it's a good thing, though, because it also means for that building a skills-based organisation, talent professionals are now being recognised for having more skill sets than just finding people. So I think it marries well into the sort of new way of thinking. If you look at some of the biggest ATSs in the globe, or especially in this region, that are building teams like Smart Recruiters, Beamery, Avatar, etc., all of these platforms now have a skills inference into the product. So it allows you to understand what the person's skill set is behind a candidate before they're hired, and also continue that process of building a skills-based organisation internally and repurposing skills into other areas, as opposed to having to look externally. Which, if you look at that 10 years ago, there wasn't too many ATSs outside of the biggies like the Workdays, iSIMS, etc. had multiple modules like that within the platforms that were as intuitive as the actual applicant tracking or the candidate CRM side of the platform. Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't just say it's the strategy side that's changing. The tech side is obviously changing. AI seems to be thrown around almost too much by people in organisations that don't understand a lot about it. But we all have to embrace it and move into this new way of working. And working hand in hand with that. I mean, AI and technology definitely comes into your strategy, but yeah, it just depends on size and scale and scope of organisation as to what your strategy looks like and what point in time you're at in your strategy. Helped a lot of organisations across the globe, both internally and from an advisory and consulting standpoint, build a talent strategy roadmap. And those roadmaps can be 5 or 6 stages long that span across 12 or 18 months, or it can be 20 to 25 stages long that span across the next 3 to 5 year plan. So it just depends your level of maturity and complexity to your organisation. Most people are starting to learn more now that we have things like ChatGPT and Bard and all of the tools that you can ask questions to. But yeah, I would certainly say that there's a lot more to a talent professional's role now that you have to be involved in the strategic at some point. You can't just be the weeds in the tactical all the time. Even leaders, I don't know too many leaders, and like me, as an example, I had over 300 people when I was at Wipro, and I used to be all the time, why are you still in the weeds? And I'm like, well, while we're still hiring at this aggressive rate of 12,000 people a quarter, how can I afford not to be in the weeds? If I don't understand what's going on, if I disappear one day, who's going to help if they don't understand what's going on? So yeah, I know that answers probably more than your simple question, Shane, but talent strategy as a whole, talent's a big meaty word nowadays, with talent management, DE&I, EVP, recruitment, marketing, retention and attraction, or attraction and engagement and retention. There's a lot more built into a talent role now than there certainly was when I first arrived in Australia.
Absolutely, yeah. And you touched on something there that I found quite interesting, is regardless of, being at that strategy level, which you have been, like still getting into the weeds, still operating, with the front line. If I was to flip that, Kris, and loop back into that strategic role that you've been in, I've seen companies in recent years sort of change the structure of talent as well. So if I give you an example, in a lot of companies I recruit for, talent plugs into HR, and the chief people officer sort of oversees that wider people, culture, talent function. What I've seen in recent years is there's been talent functions that have reported directly into the business, worked alongside HR. What's your sort of thoughts on? I'm sure there's no one size fits all model, but what's your sort of thoughts on having a structure where talent reports directly into the business, has the seat at the table, and how well do you think HR and talent should work together?
Yeah. Again, it depends on the size of the organisation. I've worked for multiple organisations and in partnership or contracting in to help sort of talent strategies with organisations where, as you said, the talent function rolls up into a CHRO or a chief people officer or a chief HR officer or whatever. Personally, I actually don't mind either way. Like, I'm not someone that says talent should always have their own function. It depends on the size of the organisation. The two largest organisations that I worked for, Amazon and Wipro, we had our own standalone function in HR. We're a business partner to our function. At both organisations, the talent acquisition function rolled up from a chief talent officer or a global head of talent acquisition and then straight into a COO. For me personally, if I think about my own development as a leader at Amazon, it definitely got me way more involved in the strategic and operational side of their business from a workforce strategy, workforce planning perspective. Or I'll say very loosely, the lack of sometimes workforce planning, which is why big tech usually are the first to be hit by the mass redundancies. Yeah. But it definitely made me understand a lot more about business leadership, business operations, the way the business was being run, business goals and objectives. But then other organisations that were slightly smaller, which often happens, the talent acquisition function did roll up into an HR function. Quite a lot of the time in those roles, the HR heads of the organisations just left me and my teams to get on with stuff because they didn't fully understand the nuances of talent acquisition. But I was always very conscious of teaching the heads of HR and the HR BPs and whoever we worked with a lot more about the talent side so that they fully understood end-to-end what we were doing. And in return, I would make sure that they were doing the exact same back and teaching me about what projects do you have going? What does that mean for the talent that comes into the business? What does that mean for retention strategies? What does it mean for social, economic reasons across the business? What are we doing with regards to DE&I? Like, I would make sure that I understood more and more. And yeah, I mean, it is one of those things where, like, a lot of talent professionals will say talent should always have their own function. I've just never been one of those people. I've been on both sides, and I'm not saying that I prefer or don't prefer either side. But at the sizes of the two organisations that I was at, that the business rolled up into, a chief operating officer, it made a lot more sense than bundling a lot more under the chief HR officer at the time, because I think it would have been too much for one person to manage. I mean, given that both of those organisations were 235,000 and over 900,000 employees, for every single person in that workforce to roll into HR, which ultimately is what happens, you're responsible as a CHRO for every person in the organisation. To be responsible for that many people doesn't make sense. So it makes sense to split it out, especially when the functions are separate. But I partnered and I made sure that my teams and talent weren't just business partners to the business. They were also partners to the HR team to fully understand the full scope of, as soon as the person hits the ground, what does the contingent workforce strategy and management look like? What does the lateral or the permanent hiring strategies look like? What does that retention piece look like? What are we doing for disability hires when they come into the building? What are we doing for neurodiverse hires once they're here? What are we doing for employer and talent branding? What are we doing for EVP? So I made sure that they understood it. And every single person that worked for me, I'm sure there's a couple that probably would disagree, have been thankful of the fact that I pushed the extra effort towards that partnership and not just a partner to the business. it just depends on the size of the organisation. I think there's benefits of doing both sides.
Yeah, amazing. You touched on something there a couple of times, and I know you're a big advocate for it. Data. You love your data, and I know you're a big advocate for it. So I'm going to probe you a little bit and get our listeners some advice and insights into, I guess, why data is so important, particularly with talent. As a HR recruiter, I'm exposed to a lot of data, particularly in companies that we're recruiting for, from attrition to retention rates and all that kind of stuff. But that's only scratching the surface. Tell us a little bit about I guess the importance of investing in data when it comes to your talent and people strategy, and also nicely run off from that. Like, what's the sort of data that you feel really matters to an organization? What should they be really focusing on?
Yeah, again, a pretty broad question, and what should organisations be focusing on also depends when it comes to data on the region, because you've got things like GDPR, which is highly influential across Europe, which organisations have to navigate carefully. But it just depends, again, size, scope, scale, and global versus national versus local presence. It's funny that you say I love my data. I was speaking to someone yesterday about data as it pertains to new technologies, AI and ML, etc., across the talent space. And the exact quote I got back from someone yesterday was, "Oh my goodness, you're a geek. What is wrong with you?" But it's something that I've always found. That's why I laughed when you said, "Let's move on to data." I just think it's important because in times gone past, a lot of talent teams made decisions on knee-jerk reactions or gut feel. And it's because it's based on people, and gut feel 60-70% of the time is often right. But in order to progress an organisation, or for example, with Talint Partners just now, we're working out strategies to become a truly global organisation, building teams in every single region. So building teams across 4 to 5 continents. And a lot of the time it does come down to data. And it's the first thing that I asked for. Without data, you can't make a data-informed decision on what's best, and you can't do risk mitigation to say, okay, let's look at these 10 things that perhaps didn't go perfectly. How do we make them better based on data? But also, here's all the things that are going well. Again, if you've not got the data to prove it, it comes down to gut feel. People data in particular. What I've seen over the past few years, especially over the last 12 months, I've been out of the country quite a lot, is that issues are being tackled head on, not just by single instances, but with a blend of technology, strategic thinking, and a little bit of a touch of creativity. A lot of new platforms are bringing the creativity to the market where you don't have to go outside to get stuff. Power BI tools are getting better and better. I know a lot of organisations, similar to myself at Wipro and at AWS, I had to do pivot tables and spreadsheets and present data to tell a story. But organisations are starting to realise that quality, more often than not, trumps quantity when it comes to data. It's about collecting the right data, not just more data for the sake of having it. If you don't know what to do with it, you don't know the story that it tells, there's no point in collecting it in the first place. And AI plays a big part in that. It enhances the understanding of, for example, workforce analytics, which can lead to more informed decisions to drive everything across the talent space, including DE&I, talent management, retention, etc. However, with the AI piece being thrown in so much in the past 12 months, especially the last 6 to 8 months, it's imperative to use AI responsibly and ensure that compliance is looked after, especially with ever-growing regions and patchworks of global regulations. There's more and more regulations coming in now that play a part in the data side. The second part of your question, what type of data would you want to collect? It depends what you want to get out the other side. I did a recent project at the end of last year on building a diversity roadmap. And the first thing that we did was an internal audit of the organisation's DE&I and where they currently sat. It's something that a few people within the organisation had read in a very good book on how to build a diversity roadmap. And they particularly took notice of the building data and collecting data, and they weren't asking the right questions. They were wondering why people in the organisation weren't responding to the questions. And I said, you've got to also think about the questioning, for example, from a DE&I lens. if I was a minority, which I'm so passionate about DE&I because I don't fall into any of the diversity categories, and I've said this on stages around the globe at talks and panels and etc. And I think that's important as well, and I'll come back to that if you ask anything more on DE&I. But even for the diversity stuff, I said if I was a minority of X category and I fell into X or Y or X and Y, I probably would put don't want to answer as that question, because the way that you've phrased the question is also wrong. So the way that you collect the data throughout your workforce is also very important. But again, it's about telling a story. When talent quite often make the mistake of giving data to a leadership team or to a stakeholder group as data, and then they try to waffle around the story. Present the data as a story. So present the most critical issues that you're deriving from the data, and then go into leadership meetings or stakeholder meetings or hiring manager meetings with how you're going to solve what you've found from the data. Or alternatively, if everything is going swimmingly, which I'll call bullshit if someone says everything's going really well, for the things that you're able to show from the data that are going well, what solutions are you putting in place, or what evolvements to that are you putting in place to make it better? When it comes to talent, there's so much data on the table. When it comes to hiring numbers, average tenure, diversity throughout the organisation, how the person was hired, source of hire, cost of hire, time to hire, like all of these things. And there's probably 150 more metrics. As much as people focus on some of the ones that I mentioned there, there's so much data that you can derive, but don't derive the data just for the sake of having it, just to be able to say, look at all these stats we've got. If you don't know what you're doing with the data to evolve processes and move it forward, only pick out the ones that you know will influence the project work that you've got, or the areas that you know that you can help evolve. That would probably be my biggest piece of advice. There's so many organizations that I go into and I'm like, okay, show me some data. And they've got 465 spreadsheets and stuff. And I'm like, what have you used this for? If you don't know how to use it, I'm like, why have you pulled it? Data's, for me, is a cool area because in a geeky way, you can start to tell a story and you can start to evolve a process, an organization, a department, or whatever, simply by looking at the complexities, all the data validation, privacy concerns across the data, any sort of challenges that you can pick out. But then you've got to have a more holistic view and a holistic approach to the talent landscape and how you can then use the data to improve things. I don't know if that answers your question, Shane. But
It does, yeah. And I really love the way you describe the data in terms of what you can do to progress, and you use words like optimize, and like essentially that's the proactive and progressive way of using the data in the right way. And you've obviously partnered with a lot of amazing brands that have done that with the data as well, because I love speaking to you about it because I learned so much about it myself. I find sometimes organizations not so much reluctant, but once they look under the hood, they start to see, oh crap, the stats and the data isn't probably what we thought it was. Or on the flip side, they see something that's really gold and shiny and they think, okay, we're great at this, and sort of forget about the rest. If I was to pluck one of those elements from a data perspective, if I was to look at the D&I, which you touched on as well, if I was to look at the D&I and say, I would imagine that there's a lot of companies that probably maybe shy away sometimes from the data in their D&I because they know that there's so much more that they can do there. Would I be right in saying that? Would I be wrong in saying that? Like, from your experience, obviously, what do you think? And also, let's flesh that one out, because I think D&I is just such a huge topic. It's, again, quite broad. I agree, but it's just such a hot trend at the moment in talent and people agendas.
Yeah, I would 100% agree with you that a lot of organizations, especially companies that have done diversity audits for, the boardroom is quite often one or two demographics most. And it's not the boardroom that often bring me in. It's usually a -1 or a -2 level to larger organizations that ask for my assistance. And the boardroom quite often don't want to see the results of a DE&I audit. And it's because they know at heart that there are huge gaps and the diversity across their own workforce and across their own organisations. Especially in Australia just now. I know that you had Natalie Flynn on recently. I've known Natalie since probably minus 90 days before she launched Equity. I've got so much respect for what she's trying to drive. And right now in Australia with the WGEA announcement, which is due in a month from now, right. end of February, where every single organisation in the whole of Australia, over 100 people, will be under jurisdiction to promote and produce all of the diversity data when it comes to gender equity and pay gaps within their organisation. That's probably a good example to use just now, because a lot of organisations have put that to the side. I've been speaking to organisations about this for a decade. And I'm sure so has Natalie and other organisations like Symmetra and other organisations who focus on diversity. But organisations here are so relaxed. Look, it's not an issue right now, so we'll get to it. And organisations are still saying that today, even though this is only 1 month out. And I can't wait to see people's faces once that data becomes going back to data again. Once that data and that information becomes public on, let's say, for example, your gender pay equity across your organisation is 51% or 35% or 40%. Organisations will very quickly crawl into the little hole and hide, and boardrooms will have to do something about it. So I like the fact that there's been a bit of a force from WGEA to put this publicly and make organisations produce the data. When it comes to DE&I, there are so many organisations that, for me, are still at ground zero or ground one. But even the organisations who do it well, most of them who have got very advanced diversity teams, who have got chief diversity officers and a few hundred people in a diversity team who have either been brought in externally or plucked into full-time roles out of other roles within the organisation. Most of these organisations will still be able to show you through data exactly what they're doing well and what they could do better. And I guarantee you there's not one single topic in diversity, even in the organisations that are market-leading organisations in the diversity spectrum, that would say that they're doing something perfectly. Every single one of these organisations will tell you that they have to continue to evolve. A lot of organisations make the mistake of thinking that a diversity roadmap, diversity strategy, or doing something more, putting something in place is a 1 to 2 or a 3 to 6 month project. It's definitely not. It doesn't stop. It's almost like saying, what do you do for sales? Do you bring someone in for 1 to 3 months and that's your sales done for the rest of the decade? They're like, of course we don't. We keep going. Well, why would diversity be any different? Especially in today's age where you literally cannot say anything right or wrong in front of the right or wrong people anymore. And you're so conscious of that, not just from a verbal standpoint, but the way that your business is being portrayed to the external market, because that hinders your brand reputation. Again, moving on to a little bit of employer branding and potentially EVP, that everything you do from a diversity standpoint affects your business. By bringing in more diverse people, you've got a much larger chance of increasing innovation across your organisation through diversity of thought. And if you're increasing innovation in your own organisation, guess what that ends up equaling? More profit, more revenue, larger scale, more growth. Like a lot of boardrooms don't look at it like that, but yeah, I mean, the diversity category is only getting larger and larger. I spoke on stage in Nashville at RecFest last year alongside probably who I would call the global whale in diversity, a guy called Torrin Ellis, who I've got extreme amounts of respect for. I've known him for a couple of years, and I use him as a mentor myself. So I still, under no pretense, think I know even 50% about the stuff that I do in diversity, because I'm still learning from organisations that allow me to develop and enhance what they're doing through my own learning. So yeah, I mean, it's a huge topic. But data driving DE&I efforts is imperative, and if organisations just put a couple of weeks aside to run a diversity audit across their organisation, they would then start to realise where the gaps are and make it an anonymous survey to your own employees, or bring in an external organisation to do the survey, so that there's a bit more security in the workforce's mind that it's not someone internally, so it's not going to get told to their managers or their managers, etc. There's definitely a growing recognition DE&I strategy and the risks behind it. Especially the strategy risks, a lot of the time being superficial. It's about getting properly granular with the metrics when it comes to DE&I to understand where we're able to succeed and where we're falling off a cliff. But most organizations want to think that they're creating an inclusive culture, but a lot of them just don't know where to start or where to evolve. And there's plenty of organizations out there that would be able to help. I've done it for a lot of organizations in a short span of my own business. In 2 years. And I know enough other organizations that I could pass people on to if I don't have capacity to help someone. But a lot of the time it's about reaching out and just learning what you're doing right and what you're doing wrong. And a lot of people are scared to put their hand up in case that data doesn't
100%.
look good to the boardroom. But I mean, it's the same as anything. The first port of call is put your hand up and admit that you probably need help. But a lot of organizations are scared to do that because they don't know what comes back.
Yeah, exactly. And like you said, I think the Regia is just the start of it. And, I feel like those individuals are going to start getting a bit of a push now, or a bit of a push in the right direction, maybe. And also, I guess, from a recruitment perspective, I understand how important it is and how common it is now for candidates, for example, if they're going through a process, they're looking at the brand, they're looking at the values, they're looking at all the typical stuff to see if it's the right fit for them. But they're also looking at who works in the business, like what is the diversity, who's on the boards, what does the leadership team look like, what does the ELT look like. It's really interesting. I know you're flying tomorrow back to Europe, and you're always flying around and on the move. So the only other question I sort of had on DE&I in particular was, you touched on a little bit there, but like what are you seeing in terms of other regions or countries or industries? Who seems to be getting it right? It'd be really interesting to, I guess, see what's sort of working, what's working for people, and where and what industry. Obviously, I don't need you to call anyone out, but if there's anything there that you think could be worth listeners hearing or looking into, that would be great.
Yeah, I mean, if I'm looking at this through a global lens, from my sort of 25 notepads that are sitting next to me from last year's event circuit, I'm a serial note taker, as you can probably tell from the board behind me, but I certainly noticed more and more organizations bringing to the forefront the recognition of neurodiversity and social mobility as critical facets of DE&I and gaining traction. And more organizations talking about ensuring that people with different cognitive abilities from varied social backgrounds are not just included, but are provided with the tools and the support and the technology and whatever else to succeed. That certainly across North America, there was a huge rise in both of those topics, where it's being recognised that it's no longer seen as normal to put someone just through the regular process, even pre-onboarding, and having to adapt your technology, your processes, even your workplaces to suit someone coming in who isn't from the traditional mould. When it comes to organizations that are doing it well, there's hundreds of organizations, in my opinion, that haven't necessarily nailed diversity, but are certainly at the forefront of trying to change the landscape. I mean, if I mention even one of Wipro's competitors, Cognizant are known globally. A lot of people will know them from the sponsorship on the side of the Aston Martin F1 car. And Cognizant are an Indian systems integrator. And for me, probably one of the most progressive from a DE&I standpoint. They've built diversity teams, not just a diversity council, around moving the needle across multiple indices. And they're a consulting business, so they're at the mercy of their clients. However, they've done everything possible to increase, even when it comes to gender diversity and also racial diversity. Or ethnic diversity across their organisation, all to be above 40%. There are plenty of organisations who I think push the needle on a global scale. Some of the largest organizations in the world do it really well and have specific programs internally that focus on ERGs, that focus on certain groups, that focus on giving everyone an equal opportunity and a chance. And there's a few organizations that I worked with last year who also bring the ERG groups together. I think that's a major mistake. And I spoke about this on stage last year. Particularly when I was at AWS, for example, and there was a group of about 80 people in the crowd from Amazon listening to the talk that I did. And they didn't realize that I was part of Women at Amazon. I worked beside Michelle Hardy on a lot of the initiatives and trying to drive even early careers and preschool females into the technical realms as part of the Amazon project work. One of the biggest mistake organizations make is in my opinion anyway, is by segmenting and separating ERGs. And that also means that if you approach, let's say it's a Black women in workforce group, for example, and I try to approach them as a white heterosexual male, to help push the needle for them, I'm often rejected from that group because I don't happen to fall into that boundary. The organizations that are doing it well are creating ERGs and safe spaces for certain demographics and groups, or all demographics and groups, but they're also encouraging those groups to work together. Because just because I'm a white heterosexual male does not mean that I should not be able to step into a neurodiverse LGBTQ group and help them push the needle in the workforce around bringing more people like themselves in. I think it's more important for the people that don't belong to the individual groups to step in and help the groups, because if every group then steps in, it's a much bigger driving force and power force to make a difference. Some of the organisations across the globe, and I won't name too many of them, because I'm sure, as I said, they would even say that they could make it better. And bringing little things like that, as opposed to segmenting and creating all these ERGs, employee resource groups, which are great, bring them together and allow them to collaborate together so that it doesn't feel like you're still a separated group, but within a larger organisation. That doesn't really solve the problem, in my opinion. There's a lot of things that organisations this side of the globe are doing. My most recent newsletter that went out on LinkedIn actually spoke about a few organisations locally to Australia, Asia Pacific, and then wider global, who I feel are doing better in diversity hiring. And some examples of the initiatives that they've brought to the forefront, ANZ and CBA were two of them, who have created entire national and regional programs around diversity hiring. So they've got separate teams, separate groups, separate strategies, etc. And that's always a good starting point, is to get to there. But diversity is a huge factor.
It is for sure. 100%. And like even before the call, we both agreed. We talk about this stuff all the time, and this episode could be a part 1, 2, 3, 4 series, because there's so much there. I feel like we've only scratched the surface today. But I'm mindful of your time. I have a couple of quick questions for you, Kris, before you jet off to the other side of the world. But most influential person, who is it?
Oh my goodness, globally, that's a big question.
Or person,
most influential person to me from a personal standpoint is definitely my grandfather. My grandfather grew up with absolutely nothing. My family have all become pretty well off because of the hard work and the grit that he put in. He was a coal miner. He's lost a couple of fingers through working his whole career, but he never put a finger down to allow anyone else to do anything for him. He's 98 years old. He still drives. He still kicks around like he's 60. I'm looking forward to seeing him when I'm in the UK as of tomorrow, which it will be nice for a few days in Scotland. But from a professional standpoint, he taught me everything. And my dad and my uncles and my aunts, and then the generations that have teared down, that hard work, grit and determination definitely gets you places. And he was also never someone that said anything that he did or would do is perfect. He would always pick out holes in how something could be done better. And I've always used that throughout my life. I would say from a professional standpoint, the male that I mentioned earlier, Torrin Ellis, has probably been one of my most desired sort of mentors over the past sort of 5 to 6 years. I've kept in contact with him consistently. I've met up with him in multiple states across the US, and he always drops everything to make time just to meet me for a chat. He's shaped a lot of the strategies that I've learned about from the US, where there's infernos to put out when it comes to diversity. And I bring a lot of those strategies back to Australia, and it's matchstick fires. I could wet my fingers and put the diversity fires out in Australia because we don't have the same issues. But he's definitely shaped a lot of things that I do. There's a lot of others who have been influential. Lars Schmidt is definitely one of them. For those in HR, you probably know who Lars is. I've spent a bit of time in multiple states with Lars as well, and he's a wealth of knowledge, and he's built multiple platforms to help evolve the TA and HR spectrum. There's a whole host. I could probably name about 50, but if I'm going to stick it to 3, personal-wise, it would be a family member. Awesome. It's definitely my grandfather. Sorry to my dad that it's not my dad, but I think he learned everything from my grandfather, which is understandable. And then from a professional standpoint, it's probably Lars and Torrin Ellis.
Very cool. And I'll flip the question: who do you inspire?
Probably no one.
You've got one here for sure.
A lot of the teams that I've had, that I've been very lucky to lead and build across the globe. I keep in contact with multiple of my direct and indirect reports, even from Amazon, which was now sort of 6-7 years ago. And I don't mean just here. People from the US I still meet up with because they use me as a mentor and they bounce ideas off of me. Same with my very large team at Wipro. A lot of them still reach out to me, even for internal help with the stuff that they're doing at Wipro internally. And the head of TA who stepped into my position will often be in those emails when they email me something to ask for help, and she'll be the first person to thank me, even though she stepped into my shoes. So I try to inspire as many people as possible. When I speak about stuff or I give people examples, my main goal is for people to take one actionable insight back that they could potentially use in their own positions or roles or day-to-day working life. I wouldn't want to name any names in case they come back and say he doesn't inspire me, but I would like to think that there's a few, but I try just to. I'm always a giver. I don't ask for money for my time. I'm always interested to help people, and that's the goal for me as a professional, is not to be greedy, not to be arrogant, but to be humble and respectful and helpful where I can be. So I'll always put my hand up to help. When I had my own, before I joined Talint Partners, my accountant didn't love that. With my own business, that I would give away free help 280 hours a year. But again, things always come back around. If I help someone, I'd like to think at some point it comes back around. And most of the time, not always, but most of the time it does. Yeah,
100%. And I can second a lot of that. Like, you've been such an inspiration for myself and a lot of what we've been doing here as a business as well. And you've always picked up the phone and gave advice where you can. So I do really appreciate it. And I'm very mindful of your time, and we're running over. But like I said, I could sit here all day chatting about this kind of stuff with you, Kris. So part 2 in the making. But look, really appreciate your time today. Thanks for all the insight. Thanks everyone for listening in, obviously. And I'm sure the notepads are out and there's lots of nuggets being taken down.
If there isn't any nuggets, like genuinely, anyone who's listening can always reach out to me. I'm on LinkedIn, I'm on email. If there's any talent and HR leaders that are interested in the event circuit that I'll be scaling across Asia Pacific this year, specifically Australia and New Zealand, feel free to flick me across your details and I'll add you into the growing delegate lists for a lot of those events. I'll be throwing multiple sizes of events and dinners and lunches, workshops, masterclasses, etc. across Australia, which is the main goal for this year. And if anyone wants to learn, I'll have the brightest and the best minds in the room, as well as some of the most sought after speakers and influential people in the talent and HR spaces across the region. So I'd love people to get involved. The database is already quite large, but I'm sure there'll be a whole cohort of people that listen to this that probably don't know who I am or what I do. And I'm always available. People can add me on LinkedIn and reach out if they've got any questions or if they want to know more about some of the stuff that we've spoken about.
Love that. Open invite. Thank you so much, Kris. Talk soon.
You're very welcome, Shane. See ya.
Thank you for tuning in to the HR Community Podcast. Remember to like and subscribe and share your views and comments below. This podcast was brought to you by Civitas Talent, the HR and HSC recruitment community. Whether you're a candidate looking for a new role or organization looking to secure brand new talent for your team, please get in touch with us today. Thank you.